Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to class, students. This is your ENG 503 Prose 2, and in this module we are discussing Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels, which is a travelogue, and it is a style of prose writing which is different from, let's say, short stories or essays. We did essays in the previous semester, that is with your Prose 1, and in Prose 2 we're going to do travelogue, and once we are done with the travelogue then we're going to go on to short stories, and I'll give you an introduction to short stories, and then we will be discussing some of the prominent short story writers. So to come back to the lecture for today, in the last lecture we saw Gulliver being given his liberty, and after weeks of being in chains he is released, and one of the first things that he wants to do is to take a look at the metropolis, that is the capital city of Lilliput, and the emperor of Lilliput agrees to that and tells the inhabitants of the capital to stay inside because Gulliver is going to come into town, and since Gulliver is so tall and the inhabitants of Lilliput are very short, therefore there is a danger of their being trampled upon. And the difference, as I told you in the previous lecture, is so great that the inches of Lilliput are equal to our feet, so that if the tallest individual is not beyond 6 inches, it would be about the same for us human beings. So a 6 foot let's say Gulliver would be equal to a 6-inch Lilliputian. So when Gulliver comes into the capital city, into the metropolis, he wants to see everything, but he can't do it because he can only walk on what you and I would call the main road, and which Swift calls the big streets. There are 2 streets that bisect the town, and I wouldn't say bisect, in fact they divide the town into 4. So Gulliver can only travel on these streets because of his height and his bulk. So when he visits the metropolis, one thing that he has to be very careful about is not to wear that long coat that he wears. So he wears only the short waistcoat, because if he were to wear the longer coat, then when he's walking about town, there are chances that the bottom of the coat, that is the hem, would touch the rooftops of the houses, and that could cause great damage because these are very, very small houses. So Gulliver has to be very careful because he has been granted this liberty after many pleadings, and it is liberty that is still sort of conditional. And a few of the conditions I'll tell you. One is that whenever Gulliver wants to come into the city, he will give warning so that the inhabitants stay indoors. One is that he will not lie down in a meadow of grass or in a cornfield, because that would harm the crop and the grass. And in return for food and drink, which is equivalent to 1,724 Lilliputians, the villages of the surrounding area are going to supply meat and drink for Gulliver's consumption. And another thing that we learned in the last lecture was that there are two parties in Lilliput, and these parties have a difference of opinion. The one thing that differentiates between these two parties is the height of the heels that they wear. One party wears high-heeled shoes, whereas the other party wears low-heeled shoes. And Swift tells us that the emperor of Lilliput favors those who wear high heels, but for ordinary work related to the administration of Lilliput, he favors those who wear low heels. So he's somewhere in the middle. In the same way, the heir to the crown wears one high heel and the other is a low heel, with the result that he can't walk straight, and it's like when he walks with a kind of limp, because if you have one shoe with a high heel and the other with a low heel, there's no way you are going to be able to walk straight. So Gulliver goes on and he says that 2 weeks after he had gained his liberty, one of the courtiers of the Emperor of Lilliput, whose name is Reldresal and who is the Secretary of Private Affairs, he comes to visit Gulliver and he seeks an appointment. And Gulliver says, fine, go ahead, talk to me. And Reldresal says that we have these two problems. One is that there are two political parties and they are always at war with each other. And the other is that their neighbor or the island across from them, that is Blefuscu, the ruler of Blefuscu is always fighting with the Lilliputians. They've had a war for the last 3 years, and the cause of the war is something that is very insignificant because it depends on which side of the egg you break. So those who break the egg from the broader side are called the Big Endians. And the Emperor of Blefuscu takes this as an excuse and is always ready to sort of invade Lilliput. Now, as far as the invasion is concerned, they've had this ongoing state of war for the last 3 years, and obviously it has taken its toll on the men and the equipment that they use. So 3 years during which 30,000 lives have been lost, and this is just the figures for the Lilliputians. The figures for the Blefuscudians are greater than this, but this is something that Reldresal is not thinking about. So he says that since there is a fleet that is ready to invade Lilliput, the emperor wants Gulliver to do something about it. In other words, to protect them from the imminent invasion. And Gulliver tells him that he is a foreigner. He is not a Lilliputian, he is not a Blefuscudian. So he says, as a foreigner, it is not right for me to interfere in the affairs of two nations. But as far as the emperor himself is concerned, if there is a threat, a dire threat, then he will definitely act in favor of the emperor. He will do all that he can to make sure that the emperor is safe and the emperor's state is safe. So he says, I should not be interfering, but because the emperor has been good to me, because the Lilliputians have been good to me, and I am a guest here, therefore, as far as it is in my ability, I am going to defend the emperor. But I don't want to interfere in the affairs of the state. So he doesn't want to actually go and do something in Blefuscu. Okay, so let's see what we have for this lecture. We're going to be doing chapter 5 today. And in the introduction to chapter 5, Swift tells us that the author, by an extraordinary stratagem, prevents an invasion, and we're going to discuss how he does that. A high title of honor is conferred upon him. Ambassadors arrive from the emperor of Blefuscu and sue for peace. So Lilliputians have what they've been wanting. The empress's apartment on fire by an accident, the author instrumental in saving the rest of the palace. So we're going to see what happens in this chapter. We know that there is something going on between Lilliputians and Blefuscudians, and we're going to see the details now. So the empire of Blefuscu is an island situated to the northeast of Lilliput, from which it is parted only by a channel of 800 yards wide. Now 800 yards for you, for me, for Gulliver is not such a big distance. But for the Lilliputians, it's like miles separate the two of them. So Gulliver had not seen Blefuscu. As he says, I avoided appearing on that side of the coast for fear of being discovered. He didn't want the Blefuscudians to know that he was there. The Lilliputians knew, and that was enough. So he says that he had not tried to see what Blefuscu is like, but now the time has come for him to see it. So all intercourse between the two empires had been strictly forbidden during the war upon pain of death. So if you communicated with the other state, you were guilty of high treason. And an embargo laid by our emperor upon all vessels whatsoever. So any Blefuscudian vessel coming to Lilliputian coasts was not allowed, and if any vessel did come, then it would be stopped. These were the orders of the Emperor of Lilliput. I communicated to His Majesty a project I had formed of seizing the enemy's whole fleet, which, as our scouts assured us, lay at anchor in the harbor, ready to sail with the first wind. So these are ships that are ready manned, they have all the weapons, they're only waiting for a good wind to propel them into the ocean. So Gulliver consults the most experienced sailors. He asks them how deep the channel is, and he says that these are people who had plumbed the depths of the channel, or who had measured the depth of the channel, which they call 70 glumgluffs deep. Now they don't use feet, they don't use inches or yards or meters, they have their own measure, and this measure for height is, or depth, is glumgluff. So 70 glumgluffs, it's a bit of a tongue twister, is about 6 feet. So the channel is not more than 6 feet deep, which is not very deep at all, but of course for the Lilliputians and the Blefuscudian, that's plenty deep. So what he does is he walks towards the northeast coast over against Blefuscu, where lying down behind a hillock, I took out my small perspective glass and viewed the enemy's fleet at anchor, consisting of about 50 men at war and a great number of transports. So what he does is he goes to the northeast coast, he lies down behind a hill, he uses his telescope, what he calls his perspective glass, to look at the fleet of the Blefuscadians, and what he finds out is that there are 50 ships that are equipped to fight, and then there are many more which are used only for transporting. Now these transporting ships could be bringing men, they could also be carrying just equipment. But as far as weaponry is concerned, that is on 50 ships. So once he sees the number of ships and the number of transporting vehicles, he comes back to the metropolis and he gives orders. And what he orders is to bring him a great quantity of the strongest cable and bars of iron. So he tells them to bring the biggest bars of iron and the strongest cable possible. And this cable, when it comes, he says, is about as thick as pack thread. Now everything you have to see from the proper perspective. Gulliver's perspective is different. For Gulliver, everything is small. For the Lilliputians, Gulliver is huge. So whatever they make, which is the strongest, biggest, for Gulliver that turns out to be the smallest. So it's a difference in perspective, and the perspective changes because of Gulliver's height and because of the size of the Lilliputians. So what he does is he takes the strongest cable that they bring him, something that is like string for him, and he takes 3 lengths of this cable because he wants to make it extra strong. And at the same time, he takes these iron bars and he twists 3 of them together. Now for Gulliver, that's very easy. If we try to do it, it would be very difficult. And what he does is, with these bars of iron, he makes hooks. Okay? Then he fixes the hooks to the cables. So if he has 50 hooks, he has 50 cables. Then he went back to the northeast coast, took off his coat, shoes, stockings, and started walking into the sea. Remember, the channel is only 6 feet deep. So he swam for about half an hour, and then he reached high water. That is, he got close to the coast of Blefuscu. Once he reached there, he says, I waded and swam in the middle about 30 yards till I felt ground. So the same kind of channel that he sees when he comes to Lilliput, he sees when he gets to Blefuscu. Once he gets to that channel, what does he do? He scares off the Blefuscadians. They jump out of their ships and started swimming to the shore. And as far as the shore was concerned, once Gulliver is spotted, there are about 30,000 people who gather on the shore because they've never seen such a giant before, and they're totally amazed. This is the point at which Gulliver takes out his tackling, those cables and those hooks, and he fastens the hook to the prow of each ship. Each ship has a part that juts out. And what Gulliver does is he puts that hook on the tip of the prow, and then he takes all these cables and he ties them together. While I was thus employed, the enemy discharged several thousand arrows. They saw him as an enemy. He is this giant who has just emerged out of the water, and he is walking towards Blefuscu. Obviously, Blefuscardians are scared to death, and so they start firing arrows at the giant, and these arrows hurt Gulliver, not in the sense of pain, because the distance is so great and Gulliver is still wearing that leather waistcoat, but it interferes in the work that he is doing. So Gulliver is interrupted very frequently in the work that he is doing, and this is very annoying for him. And what is most annoying and what is most disturbing is the fact that some of these arrows are aimed at his eyes. So he says that my greatest apprehension was for my eyes. Remember earlier also the Lilliputians had fired an arrow at his eye, and that had resulted in the captain of the guard handing over the culprits to Gulliver to punish as he thought fit. Of course, Gulliver, being a very compassionate man and not wanting to make enemies in Lilliput, had just set all those men free. So here, when he is doing this work, tying the hooks and the cables together and then knotting the cords, he has all these arrows that are fired at him, and Gulliver says that several thousand arrows are fired at him. So because he is afraid for his eyes, he has this brilliant idea, and he then acts upon that. And the idea is that he had a pair of spectacles in a private pocket which had escaped the emperor's officials' attentions. So when he comes up with this idea of using his spectacles, he takes them out of this pocket that the emperor's officials had not seen, and he puts on these spectacles to protect his eyes. As he says, I fastened them as strongly as I could upon my nose, and thus armed, went on boldly with my work. So once he had those spectacles around his eyes, he was safe. Then no arrow could actually strike at his eyes. So he says, I continued to work, and I was not afraid anymore of my eyes being affected. So by this time he had fastened all the hooks, and taking the knot in my hand, he began to pull. Now he is pulling 50 ships, and they're not moving. Well, obviously they will not move because they were anchored. So the boldest part of his enterprise is still left. Then what he does is that he, after he has fastened the hooks, he cuts the cables. And once he has cut the cables, the Lilliputians think that he is going to let those ships adrift. But Gulliver is smarter than that. What he does is, he has all of these ships hooked together. And imagine the surprise of the Blefuscardians when they saw all the ships moving together. And that's because Gulliver was pulling. Remember those hooks that he had put in the prows? He pulls all 50 ships, and when they saw all 50 ships going, they put up a scream of grief and despair, as it is almost impossible to describe or conceive. Well, obviously, when people see that all the ships are being dragged, they would scream. They had thought that he would just cut the anchor and it would take them time to find the ships and bring them back to port. But here they see Gulliver pulling these ships, and when he gets out of danger, he stopped to take out the arrows that stuck in his hands and face, and some of the ointment that he had been given by the emperor's physician, he rubs on his hand and his face. Remember, his hands and his face are the only exposed parts. He's wearing clothes, he's fully dressed, but he had taken off his shoes, he had taken off his hat and coat. So his face and his hands are exposed, and that is where he gets this sharp, prickly sort of feeling when they fire arrows at him, because remember, the arrows of the Blefuscardians, as the arrows of the Lilliputians, are poisoned. And so he applies some ointment, he takes off his spectacles and waits. When the tide goes out, he wades into the middle of the channel and arrives at the royal port of Lilliput. And imagine the scene. Here is the emperor, and here are all these people who see Gulliver dragging 50 ships to the port of Lilliput. So what are they going to do? They're going to scream with joy, obviously, because they are waiting there to see what's going to happen. So just as on the shores of Blefuscu there's a scream of grief, on the shores of Lilliput there's a scream of joy that is sent up. And they could not, at first they couldn't see what was happening. All they could see was Gulliver, who was up to his breast in water. You see, he's wading, and they can just see Gulliver. They can't see the ships as yet, but they can see half of Gulliver. And when he comes to the middle of the channel, then they can't see anything but the top of his head, because he is up to his neck in water. And that's when they think that perhaps Gulliver has drowned. But they could also see the enemy's fleet approaching. So they thought that, you know, their world had come to an end, because they couldn't see Gulliver. They could just see the top of his head. They thought he was drowning. And they could also see the enemy's fleet approaching. But the emperor soon could ease his fears, because when he came into the shallow part of the channel, they could see Gulliver emerging from the water. So every step that he takes, more of his body can be seen. And when Gulliver holds up the end of the cable by which the fleet is fastened, you can imagine what the Lilliputians felt like. And then Gulliver also, you know, shouts aloud. He says, "Long live the most puissant king of Lilliput." So he comes up with this big cry, and obviously that's very exciting for the emperor. And he is so excited that he creates him a nardac on the spot. Now, Swift doesn't tell us what a nardac is, but according to Gulliver, it is the highest title of honor among the Lilliputians. So, victory for the Lilliputians, defeat for the Blefuscudian, and all thanks to Gulliver, who has pulled the entire fleet towards Lilliput. So, and now you see what you need to think here is how greedy a person can get. And this is Swift coming in with a remark. His Majesty desired I would take some other opportunity of bringing all the rest of his enemy's ships into his ports. It's not enough that Gulliver has brought 50 enemy ships into port. He says, bring the transports also. So, man basically cannot have enough of anything. And Swift is being very sarcastic here when he talks about the king of Lilliput and his desires. Imagine the size of the king of Lilliput and look at what he wants. He wants Blefuscu to be totally defeated. He's not satisfied with the 50 ships that Gulliver has brought in. He's very happy, but at the same time that he gives him the highest title of Lilliput, he says, you know, maybe some other time you can bring in the rest of the ships also. So unmeasurable is the ambition of princes. You know, this is where Swift comes in with his satirical comments. So he wants the total annihilation, total destruction of the empire of Blefuscu, so that he would have control over Blefuscu, and Blefuscu would become a sort of province where he could send a person to rule, and in this way he could bring all the big Indians back and force everyone to break their egg at the smaller end and not at the bigger end. So, and this is Swift being very, very sarcastic, because it's all about which side of the egg to break, the small side or the big side. That's all that they have to fight over. They've fought for 3 years. People from Lilliput have gone into exile in Blefuscu because the Lilliputians would not allow them to break their eggs at the bigger end. So the ambition of the Emperor of Lilliput is what Jonathan Swift is being very sarcastic about here. He says that he wanted to be the sole monarch of the world. For them, the world comprises of Lilliput and Blefuscu. And Blefuscu must be totally destroyed so that Lilliput could govern Blefuscu. But I endeavor to divert him from this design by many arguments drawn from the topics of policy as well as justice, and I plainly protested. So this is Gulliver's protest, that I would never be an instrument of bringing a free and brave people into slavery. This is Swift interjecting a comment into the ambition of the Emperor of Lilliput. Imagine the size of the Emperor. He's not 6 inches high, and he wants to rule the whole world. Not only has Gulliver brought 50 ships, but he has, in one sense, he has prevented the invasion. He has prevented the loss of lives, because the ships that he brings in do not have any crew member. The crew members jump into the water and swim for shore when they see Gulliver approaching and when they see Gulliver cutting the anchors. So once Gulliver declares that he's never going to bring a free people into slavery, the king gets after him. The king becomes his enemy, and he mentions this in the next council meeting that they have. The wiser people in the council agree with Gulliver because no free people want to be brought into slavery. But there were others who turned the king against Gulliver by harping on this again and again, because this open and bold declaration that Gulliver is talking about, he says, was so opposite to the schemes and politics of His Imperial Majesty that he could never forgive him. So he always holds this thing against Gulliver, because what he wants is to rule the whole world, and Gulliver is the only way that he can do it, and Gulliver refuses to do that. He said, I brought you these ships, that means that Lilliput is not going to be invaded, but if you want me to bring a free and bold people into slavery, I will not do that. So he mentions this in a very artful manner, very cleverly, very cunningly. He mentions this, and there are some who were, as Gulliver calls them, my secret enemies, who sort of made sure that the emperor realized that Gulliver was being perhaps very bold and rude in denying the emperor what the emperor wanted. So this sort of creates a kind of rift between Gulliver and the emperor. He does create him a Nardak. He gives him the highest title of honor in the land of Lilliput. But he doesn't like the fact that Gulliver has opposed him. About 3 weeks after this exploit, there arrived a solemn embassy from Blefuscu with humble offers of a peace, which was soon concluded upon conditions very advantageous to our emperor. So he says, I'm not going to give you the details, but Blefuscu accepted defeat. They sent ambassadors and they signed a peace accord. And that peace accord was obviously in favor of the Emperor of Lilliput, because he could dictate the terms and conditions of the peace treaty. There were 6 ambassadors with a train of about 500 persons, and their entry was magnificent. Imagine these people entering into the court of the Emperor of Lilliput. They are coming as ambassadors, they're coming to sign a peace treaty, but they are highly placed officials, and therefore they do not travel alone. And this is something that is worth thinking about, because here also what Swift is pointing to is the amount of effort and money that would be spent in sending these ambassadors over. 6 ambassadors, 500 people attending them. When the treaty was finished, wherein I did them several good offices by the credit I now had, or at least appeared to have at court, their excellency, who were privately told how much I had been their friend, made me a visit in form. So the ambassadors were told by people at court the part that Gulliver had played in preventing the invasion of Blefuscu by Lilliput. So they went to Gulliver and they said that we want to talk to you. And Gulliver obliged them, and he says, I don't want to discuss the details because that's something that becomes very boring. But we had a very nice discussion, because they began with compliments, and they invited him to Blefuscu and desired me to show them some proofs of my prodigious strength. Now this is something that is very human, you know. Here are these tiny little folk from Blefuscu, and they see this giant, and they want him to show them how strong he is, because they had heard talk from people who had gone from Lilliput to Blefuscu. So Gulliver showed them some ways to prove his strength in front of these ambassadors from Blefuscu. So they invited him, and you know, these they've extended this very formal invitation on behalf of the Emperor of Blefuscu. So Gulliver thanked them and said that I have heard a lot about your emperor. Please convey my best wishes, my best regard, and I shall visit Blefuscu when I have the time. So this is sort of, these are the parting comments that Gulliver made to the Blefuscudian ambassadors. The next time that Gulliver meets the Emperor of Lilliput, he requests him to visit Blefuscu. And the Emperor gives him the permission, but gives it to him in a very cold manner, because, you know, he's not happy with Gulliver. Gulliver can guess the reason, but, you know, he's a little confused, and he says, why should the Emperor be angry with me? So then somebody from the court, and remember, there will always be people in the center of the government who will carry stories. They will carry stories from the court to people outside, and they will carry stories from the outside to the people of the court. And what Gulliver is informed is that, remember, there are these two people who are not really in favor of Gulliver. One is Flimnap and the other is Bolgolam, the admiral of the realm. So Flimnap, the treasurer, and Bolgolam had given reports to the Emperor of Lilliput of how Gulliver welcomed the ambassadors from Blefuscu. And Gulliver does it in good intention, but because the Emperor is angry with him for not bringing the entire fleet to Lilliput, when he hears that Gulliver has given time to the ambassadors from Blefuscu and he has promised to go to Blefuscu, the Emperor of Lilliput is not happy at all. So when Gulliver asks him if he can go and visit the Blefuscudian monarch, he says, all right, you may go. But Gulliver can sense that the Emperor is unhappy with him. And this is the time, Swift says, when he first began to conceive some imperfect idea of courts and ministers. So this is Gulliver's first exposure to the kind of mischief and the kind of gossip and scandal mongering that goes on in courts. And Gulliver says, it is to be observed that these ambassadors spoke to me by an interpreter, the languages of both empires differing as much from each other as any two in Europe. So the Blefuscudians do not speak the language of the Lilliputians, just as the Lilliputians do not speak the language of the Blefuscudians. So in spite of the fact that Gulliver has been talking to the Blefuscudians with the aid of an interpreter, his conversations, his behavior is still reported as being treacherous to the emperor of Lilliput. And Swift does not allow any opportunity to go by without making some form of comment. So here also he says, you know, the languages of Lilliput and Blefuscu are as different from each other as, let's say, English is from Spanish or French is from German. So this is how different the languages are. And Swift here is pointing out the fact that although they are part of the same continent, yet they speak very different languages in Europe. So this conversation that he has with the ambassadors, it is reported as being treacherous to the emperor of Lilliput, and the emperor of Lilliput is not very happy with Gulliver when he comes to ask him permission to go and visit the Blefuscudian monarch. It must be confessed that from the great intercourse of trade and commerce between both realms, from the continual reception of exiles which is mutual among them, and from the custom to send the young nobility and rich gentry to the other in order to polish themselves by seeing the world and understanding men and manners, there are few persons of distinction or merchants or seamen who dwell in the maritime parts, but what can hold conversation in both tongues. So the strange thing is, let's go back a bit. The strange thing is that these two kingdoms, these two empires, have trade and commerce between them. The rich nobility of Lilliput go for their higher education or an increase in knowledge to Blefuscu. And the nobility from Blefuscu come to Lilliput to get a taste of what the rest of the world is like. And yet, he says, very few people speak both languages. Now that's strange. And again, it is a comment on the situation that existed in Europe at the time, because the Englishmen would not learn French or German or Spanish, and the people inhabiting France, Germany, Italy, Spain would not learn the English language, which is pretty silly because they have so much trade and commerce. There are so many people who are traveling from Lilliput to Blefuscu and the other way around also. So what happens when Gulliver goes to the emperor of Blefuscu? He finds out that nobody speaks the language of Lilliput. And he's amazed because these two countries, these two states have so much in common, but they refuse to learn each other's language. So when he visits the emperor, Swift says that Gulliver is very surprised that there are hardly any people who speak the language of Lilliput. Now he goes back a bit and he says that the reader will remember that when I signed this statement that set me free, he did not like some of the articles that were included because to him they appeared to be too servile. But being now a Nardak of the highest rank in that empire, such offices were looked upon as below my dignity, and the emperor never once mentioned them to me. So he recalls the terms of this treaty or this document, which he says he did not like because there were some articles or some portions that appeared to him to be more what a servant would do than what a nardak would do. So a nardak being the highest title in the state, a person who was created a nardak would not be doing all those things. However, it was not long before I had an opportunity of doing His Majesty a most signal service. So there were things that that he could do as nardak and things that he could not do. And here Gulliver recounts another experience that he had in Lilliput when he was, as he say, woken up at midnight by many hundred people hammering on his door and wanting him to help them because they were scared out of their wits. And he says he heard the word burglum repeated over and over again. And people from the emperor's court, they sort of said, please come and help us, come and help us. Now Gulliver did not know what it was that they wanted his help with. And the people from the court told him that the empress had gone to sleep reading a romance, and this had resulted in a fire spreading and a fire catching which engulfed the palace in flames. Now, this is something that Gulliver doesn't sort of think that he is the right person for, but out of good intentions he gets up and when orders are given for the path to be clear, he goes towards the palace to find out what is wrong. And he sees that they had put ladders to the walls and they were trying to throw buckets of water into the palace, but the water was not reaching the palace. And these buckets for Gulliver were the size of thimbles, very, very small. And so what Gulliver does at this time is rather, it's rather uncomfortable and perhaps unhygienic also, but he doesn't know what to do. He thinks that he can probably put the flames out if he covers the palace with his coat, but he has come in such a hurry that he left his coat behind, and his leather jerkin or his leather waistcoat will not fulfill the purpose of the kind of blanket. You know, if there's a fire going, one way you can put out a fire is by covering the fire with a blanket. And when the fire does not get any oxygen, it will die out. But here Gulliver had left his coat behind. So what he does is that he urinates on the palace and the fire is put out. He urinates and the fire is put out, but because the whole palace then is full of Gulliver's urine, so the empress becomes very angry and she says, I am never going to use this palace again because it is filthy now. So you can imagine what the empress's condition would have been like to have this giant of a man urinating on the palace. So although he puts out the fire, he does it in such a way that the empress becomes very angry with him, and he, that is Gulliver, expects the emperor to thank him, but he also realizes that the emperor might not like the way in which he has put out the fire, because according to the laws of Lilliput, it is a big crime to urinate within the precincts of the palace. You have probably seen written on walls, please do not urinate here. And people go and do it. That's unhygienic, it's unhealthy, and it is wrong. So for Gulliver to do that is absolutely inexcusable, because the entire palace becomes filthy. And the Empress, of course, is very angry with him. And the message that is sent to him says that the Empress, conceiving the greatest abhorrence of what I had done, removed to the most distant side of the court and resolved firmly that those buildings should never be repaired for her use. Now, these were the part of the palace that these rooms are a part of the palace that the Empress used. So she gives orders that that part of the palace she's never going to use again, because it is all filthy, it is all full of urine, and she is never ever going to use that part of the palace. Let us very quickly go through what we have done today. We started from chapter 5, and chapter 5 told us a bit about the invasion that the Blefuscardians are planning on Lilliput, and how Gulliver sees that there are these ships and these transport vessels that are all ready to invade Lilliput. And so he comes up with a plan. He has cable brought in, and he tells them to bring me iron bars. So when he gets the cable and he gets the iron bars, he twists the cables and the iron bars together so that he has hooks with long cables. And then he swims out into the channel, which is all that separates Blefuscu from Lilliput, and it's almost like England and France. Lilliput and Blefuscu being England and France, because if you remember, there is just the English Channel between the two countries, and they are communicating with each other all the time, but they will not learn each other's language. So what Gulliver does is he swims the channel, and when he becomes close to Blefuscu, he sees the part in the channel which is very shallow. So then when he stands up, the Blefuscardians at once become scared, and the crews in the ships, they jump out of the ships and they swim for shore. So what Gulliver does is he hooks these 50 ships which are all ready to attack Lilliput. He hooks them together, he ties the cables in a knot, and he starts to pull these ships. So when he comes close to the shores of Lilliput, the Emperor of Lilliput can only see the head of Gulliver, because by that time Gulliver is swimming and the channel is deep, and the Emperor of Lilliput thinks that everything has come to an end because he can see the enemy vessels approaching. What he doesn't know is that Gulliver is pulling them, that Gulliver has that cable tied in a knot, and he's pulling these 50 empty vessels. So when he brings them close to the shore of Lilliput, the emperor is very excited and gives him the highest title of honor in the land of Lilliput. But soon after that he says, you've brought these 50 vessels, now I want you to bring the transports also. And Gulliver at this moment puts his foot down and he says, no, I will not do that. I've brought you these ships because they were going to invade Lilliput. But I'm not going to bring a free and brave and bold people to be your slaves. Now when he does that, when he says this, the emperor becomes a little angry and he becomes cold towards Gulliver. He doesn't say anything, but when he's sitting in his council, he mentions it in council, and those who are against Gulliver, they try to make the emperor even more angry by saying, yes, he shouldn't have said this, and you are the emperor and he must obey you. And so Gulliver finds out that the emperor becomes a little distant from him, and it becomes even more clear to him when a few weeks after this incident of bringing the ships to Lilliput, the Blefuscudian emperor sends 6 ambassadors to sign a peace treaty with Lilliput. These 6 ambassadors have 500 people who accompany them, and once they have signed the peace treaty, they come to Gulliver to thank him for not enslaving them, for not bringing all the other ships. And Gulliver is very friendly with them. He shows them how strong he is. And when the ambassadors invite him to visit Blefuscu, he says, yes, I will, why not? So when news of this reaches the Emperor of Lilliput, he becomes even more cold, so that when Gulliver goes to ask him permission to go to the court of Blefuscu, the emperor is very cold in his manner, and he says, all right, you can go, and that's about it. And then a few weeks after that, an incident happens which makes the emperor even more angry, because the empress's part of the palace catches fire, and Gulliver puts out the fire by urinating on the entire building. And that makes the empress very angry. She complains to the emperor, and the emperor is glad that the fire was put out, but the empress says that she is never going to inhabit that part of the palace, because everything has become filthy and everything has become contaminated, and therefore she discusses this with some people who are close to her, and she says, I am going to have my revenge, because she thinks that Gulliver has done it deliberately, although Gulliver, to give him his due, has done it only because there was no other way he could put out the fire, and in any case the palace would have been burnt to ashes if he had not acted promptly. But perhaps that was not the best way to put out the fire. So we're going to stop here, and we're going to start chapter 6 in the next lecture. Thank you for your patience, and Allah Hafiz until we meet again.